13 years ago, on March 18, 2003, Italian doctor Isabella Conti made her final radio contact from the most dangerous road in Iraq. Her voice, steady despite the circumstances, crackled through the static to Red Cross headquarters in Baghdad. "Base, this is Medical Unit 7. We're approaching the halfway point to Fallujah. The children here need us." Those would be the last words ever heard from the 32-year-old physician and her 5 fellow humanitarian workers who had risked everything to bring hope to a war-torn nation. Before you continue, subscribe and hit the bell icon. Here we reopen archived cases with respect and proof. The disappearance shattered not only Isabella's parents, Marco and Elena Conti, in their small village outside Milan, but devastated families across 3 countries. British nurse Sarah Thompson had joined the mission to honor her late brother, a soldier who had died in the conflict's early days. German logistics coordinator Klaus Weber had postponed his wedding to participate in what he called humanity's most important work. French translator Marie Dubois had left her 2 young children with grandparents, promising to return within a month. Lebanese-American driver Karim Hassan had taken the job to support his extended family in Beirut. And leading them all was Dr. Isabella Conti, whose medical expertise had already saved hundreds of lives in Afghanistan, Somalia, and the Balkans. The convoy had departed Baghdad at dawn, carrying medical supplies desperately needed in Fallujah's overcrowded hospitals. Intelligence reports indicated increased insurgent activity along the route, but the Red Cross had negotiated safe passage agreements with multiple factions. Isabella had personally insisted on making the journey, despite warnings from military commanders who called the Baghdad-Fallujah road the highway to hell. Her determination stemmed from letters she'd received from Iraqi doctors describing children dying from treatable conditions due to medical shortages. As news of the convoy's disappearance spread, the international community mobilized massive search efforts. Helicopters scoured the desert, while ground teams investigated every abandoned vehicle and burned-out building along the route. The Red Cross activated emergency protocols, reaching out to tribal leaders, religious authorities, and even insurgent groups through intermediaries. Isabella's photograph appeared on news broadcasts worldwide, her kind eyes and determined smile becoming the face of humanitarian sacrifice. The Iraqi government, already overwhelmed by the chaos of occupation, allocated significant resources to the search. American and coalition forces temporarily suspended combat operations in the area, focusing entirely on finding the missing aid workers. Local residents, despite the dangers, organized their own search parties, understanding that these foreigners had come to help their people. For weeks, every lead was pursued, every rumor investigated, every possible explanation explored. But as days turned to weeks, and weeks to months, hope began to fade. The families refused to accept the growing likelihood that their loved ones were dead. Marco Conti mortgaged his small farm to hire private investigators. Sarah Thompson's parents lobbied the British government for more aggressive action. Klaus Weber's fiancée postponed their wedding indefinitely, keeping his place at the altar. The absence of bodies, ransom demands, or credible witness accounts created a vacuum filled only by speculation and false hope. By winter 2003, official search efforts were scaled back. The convoy's disappearance joined the long list of Iraq war mysteries filed away in bureaucratic archives while families continued their private agony. Isabella Conti had vanished into the desert, leaving behind only questions and the haunting echo of her last transmission. "The children here need us." The months following the convoy's disappearance transformed the Conti family home in Lombardy into a shrine of desperate hope. Elena Conti converted Isabella's childhood bedroom into a command center, its walls covered with maps of Iraq, photographs from search efforts and correspondence with government officials across 3 continents. Every morning she would sit at Isabella's old desk, writing letters to anyone who might have information. Military commanders, aid organizations, journalists, and even former Iraqi officials living in exile. Marco Conti aged a decade in those first 6 months. The robust farmer who had once lifted hay bales with ease now struggled to tend his small vineyard. Neighbors would find him standing at the edge of his property at sunset, staring toward the east, as if he could somehow will his daughter home through pure paternal love. He spoke little during this period, but when he did, it was always the same question. How does a convoy simply vanish in broad daylight? The International Red Cross faced unprecedented pressure to provide answers. Weekly briefings with families became exercises in professional frustration as officials repeatedly admitted they had no new information. The organization's credibility suffered as media coverage intensified, with headlines questioning whether proper security protocols had been followed. Internal investigations revealed that the convoy had indeed followed established procedures, but critics argued that the mission should never have been approved, given the deteriorating security situation. In London, Sarah Thompson's parents, retired teacher David and librarian Margaret, became unlikely activists. They organized vigils outside the British Parliament, wrote op-eds for major newspapers, and appeared on television programs demanding government action. Their dining room table disappeared under stacks of petitions, letters from supporters, and research materials about Iraq's complex tribal and insurgent networks. David Thompson, a quiet man who had never been politically active, found himself debating foreign policy experts on BBC programs, his voice shaking with controlled fury as he demanded answers about his daughter's fate. The mystery deepened as supposed leads emerged and evaporated. In April 2003, a Bedouin shepherd claimed to have seen vehicles burning near an abandoned oil installation. Investigation teams found charred metal, but forensic analysis proved inconclusive. Later that summer, a former Iraqi army officer contacted coalition forces, claiming knowledge of a mass grave containing foreign aid workers. The site was excavated over several weeks, revealing only the remains of Iraqi civilians killed during earlier fighting. Klaus Weber's fiancée, Anna Richter, made a decision that stunned their families and friends. Instead of accepting a comfortable teaching position in Munich, she enrolled in an intensive Arabic language course and applied for humanitarian positions in the Middle East. "If Klaus is trapped somewhere, I need to understand his world," she explained to concerned relatives. By late 2003, she was working with refugee organizations in Jordan, using her proximity to Iraq's border to pursue her own investigation into the convoy's fate. The Lebanese-American community in Detroit, where Karim Hassan had grown up, organized fundraising drives to support the ongoing search efforts. His elderly mother, Fatima, refused to hold a funeral service despite pressure from well-meaning relatives. "Until I see his body, my son lives," she would say in Arabic, her weathered hands clutching prayer beads worn smooth by constant use. The community respected her decision, maintaining a weekly prayer circle for Karim's safe return. Marie Dubois' children, 8-year-old Sophie and 5-year-old Jean, lived with their maternal grandparents in Lyon, while their father, unable to cope with his wife's disappearance, had suffered what doctors diplomatically termed a complete breakdown. The children asked daily when Maman would return from her important work, and their grandparents struggled to explain a situation that defied adult comprehension. As 2003 ended and 2004 began, the convoy's disappearance became part of Iraq's tragic background noise. Other headlines dominated international attention: suicide bombings, sectarian violence, political developments, and mounting coalition casualties. The 6 missing humanitarian workers gradually faded from front-page news, remembered primarily by their families and a dwindling circle of advocacy groups. But in the intelligence communities of multiple nations, the case remained active. Classified reports circulated among agencies, analyzing intercepted communications, debriefing captured insurgents, and cross-referencing the convoy's disappearance with broader patterns of violence against humanitarian workers. These efforts were methodical, professional, and ultimately frustrating in their lack of concrete results. The silence was perhaps the cruelest aspect of the entire ordeal. Without bodies, without ransom demands, without credible witness accounts, the families existed in a limbo between hope and grief. Isabella Conti had simply vanished into the vast, unforgiving landscape of a country at war, leaving behind only the echo of her commitment to helping others. The second year of uncertainty brought a parade of false leads that would torment the families with cycles of hope and devastating disappointment. In February 2004, a grainy video surfaced on an Arabic news network, purporting to show Western hostages held by an unknown insurgent group. For 48 agonizing hours, the Conti family believed they could identify Isabella's silhouette in the background. Enhanced analysis by intelligence agencies eventually determined the footage was months old and showed different captives entirely, but not before Elena Conti had collapsed from exhaustion and been hospitalized for 3 days. Now I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact time you're hearing this story. We're interested to know which places and at what moments of day or night these documented accounts reach. Spring 2004 brought perhaps the cruelest deception yet. A man claiming to be a former insurgent contacted the Red Cross through intermediaries, offering detailed information about the convoy's fate in exchange for asylum in Europe. He described a remote camp where the 6 aid workers were allegedly being held, providing specifics that seemed to demonstrate genuine inside knowledge. Italian authorities, working with coalition forces, organized a complex rescue operation involving special forces from 3 nations. The raid on the suspected camp location, conducted under cover of darkness in May 2004, found only abandoned buildings and evidence of recent evacuation. Forensic teams discovered items of clothing and personal effects that initially seemed promising, but DNA analysis proved they belonged to other missing persons cases. The supposed informant disappeared, leaving investigators to conclude they had been deliberately misled, possibly as a diversion for other insurgent activities. Marco Conti's health deteriorated rapidly during this period. The constant emotional roller coaster, combined with his refusal to properly eat or sleep, led to his hospitalization in June 2004. Doctors privately told Elena that her husband was suffering from what they termed anticipatory grief syndrome. His body was responding to loss even though the loss hadn't been confirmed. Elena faced an impossible choice, caring for her devastated husband while maintaining hope for their missing daughter. The international community's attention to individual missing persons cases began to wane as Iraq descended deeper into chaos. The Abu Ghraib prison scandal dominated headlines, followed by increasing sectarian violence and mounting coalition casualties. Humanitarian organizations scaled back operations dramatically, with many Western NGOs withdrawing entirely from Iraq. The Red Cross itself reduced its presence to minimal essential services, making follow-up investigations into the missing convoy increasingly difficult. British intelligence services provided the Thompson family with regular briefings that became exercises in professional disappointment. Agent Sarah Mitchell, assigned as the family's primary contact, later described these meetings as among the most difficult aspects of her career. "Every month I had to sit across from David and Margaret Thompson and tell them we had nothing new to report," she recalled in classified debriefings. "They never blamed me personally, but I could see hope dying in their eyes with each passing month." Klaus Weber's fiancée Anna, now working with Palestinian refugees in Jordan, began developing her own network of contacts along the Iraq-Jordan border. Her fluency in Arabic and willingness to venture into dangerous areas gave her access to information unavailable to official agencies. In September 2004, she reported meeting a truck driver who claimed to have seen a Red Cross convoy under attack near Fallujah, but subsequent investigation revealed he was describing a different incident from several months later. The psychological toll on all the families intensified as the first anniversary of the disappearance approached. Grief counselors noted that families of missing persons often experience more severe and prolonged trauma than those who lose loved ones in confirmed deaths. The inability to mourn properly, combined with the constant possibility of their loved one's return, created a unique form of psychological torture. Marie Dubois' children, now living permanently with their grandparents, began showing signs of severe emotional distress. 9-year-old Sophie developed selective mutism, refusing to speak at school, while 6-year-old Jean began having violent nightmares about bad men taking maman away. Child psychologists recommended intensive therapy, but the children's father remained too unstable to participate in treatment decisions. The Lebanese-American community in Detroit organized increasingly elaborate memorial services, walking a careful line between honoring Karim Hassan's sacrifice and maintaining hope for his return. Imam Abdullah Rashid, who had known the Hassan family for decades, struggled to provide spiritual guidance in a situation where Islamic traditions offered no clear precedent. "How do we pray for the dead when we don't know if they are dead?" he confided to fellow clergy members. As 2004 ended, even the most optimistic observers acknowledged that the chances of finding the convoy members alive had become virtually non-existent. Intelligence reports suggested that insurgent groups typically executed hostages within weeks of capture, rather than maintaining long-term captivity. The absence of any communication or ransom demands after 20 months strongly indicated that the worst had occurred, yet the families refused to abandon hope entirely. Elena Conti continued her daily letter-writing campaign, now addressing Iraqi reconstruction officials, tribal leaders, and anyone else who might have information. "Until someone shows me my daughter's body," she told the Italian journalist, "I will continue to believe she might walk through that door tomorrow morning." By 2005, the search for Isabella Conti and her fellow aid workers had transformed from an active rescue operation into a cold case investigation. The families, now hardened by 2 years of disappointment, began to understand that they were no longer searching for survivors, but for closure. This shift in perspective brought its own form of anguish, accepting that their loved ones were likely dead while still having no bodies to bury, no graves to visit, no final rituals to perform. The Iraqi landscape itself seemed to conspire against any resolution. The desert between Baghdad and Fallujah had become a killing field where hundreds of people, Iraqi civilians, coalition soldiers, contractors and aid workers, had simply vanished. Mass graves were discovered regularly, but forensic resources were overwhelmed. Bodies in various states of decomposition were found buried in the sand, hidden in abandoned buildings, or dumped in remote locations. Each discovery brought renewed hope to families of missing persons, followed by crushing disappointment when identifications proved negative. Intelligence agencies began developing new theories about what had happened to the Red Cross convoy. Intercepted communications suggested that multiple insurgent groups operated along the Baghdad-Fallujah route, often competing for territory and resources. Some analysts theorized that the convoy might have been attacked by one group, with their vehicles and supplies taken by another, making investigation nearly impossible. Others suggested that the attack might have been a case of mistaken identity, with insurgents believing they were targeting a military convoy. Elena Conti's transformation during this period was remarkable and heartbreaking. The once quiet farmer's wife had become an internationally recognized advocate for missing persons in conflict zones. She testified before European Parliament committees, addressed United Nations working groups, and consulted with families of disappeared persons from conflicts around the world. Her expertise, born from personal tragedy, made her a sought-after voice in policy discussions about protecting humanitarian workers. The physical evidence from the original search efforts was re-examined using improved forensic techniques. Items of clothing found near the suspected attack site underwent more sophisticated analysis, while satellite imagery from the time period was enhanced using new technology. Despite these efforts, investigators found only fragments, a piece of Red Cross medical equipment here, tire tracks that might have belonged to the convoy there, but nothing definitive enough to reconstruct exactly what had happened. Marco Conti's recovery from his breakdown was slow and incomplete. He returned to farming his small vineyard, but seemed to move through daily activities like a man underwater. Neighbors reported seeing him talking to Isabella's photograph, asking her opinion about crop rotation and weather patterns as if she were still present. His relationship with Elena became strained as she threw herself into advocacy work while he retreated into private grief. In London, David and Margaret Thompson had become fixtures at government briefings about Iraq policy. Their persistent questions about the fate of missing aid workers embarrassed officials who had no answers to provide. David Thompson's transformation from quiet teacher to fierce advocate impressed even seasoned diplomats. He had a way of asking simple questions that exposed the complexity and contradictions in our Iraq policy, recalled Foreign Office official James Crawford. The case took on symbolic importance beyond the personal tragedies of 6 missing individuals. Isabella Conti's story became emblematic of the broader failure to protect civilian aid workers in conflict zones. International humanitarian law theoretically protected such workers, but the reality in Iraq demonstrated the inadequacy of legal frameworks when facing non-state actors who rejected international conventions. Klaus Weber's fiancée, Anna, had established herself as an unofficial coordinator between the families and various investigation efforts. Her work with refugees in Jordan gave her unique insights into Iraq's tribal networks and informal power structures. Through patient relationship building, she developed sources of information unavailable to official agencies. However, even her best contacts could provide only fragments of rumors and speculation about what might have happened to the convoy. The children most affected by the disappearances were growing up in the shadow of unresolved loss. Marie Dubois' daughter Sophie, now 10, had begun asking direct questions about whether her mother was dead. Child psychologists recommended honest communication, but how could her grandparents honestly discuss a situation that remained genuinely uncertain? The family existed in a limbo that prevented normal grieving processes from occurring. Karim Hassan's mother, Fatima, had become a respected figure in Detroit's Lebanese-American community, her dignity in the face of uncertainty inspiring others facing their own losses. She established a support group for families of missing persons, drawing parallels between her son's disappearance and the experiences of families who had lost relatives during Lebanon's civil war. Uncertainty is its own form of death, she would tell new members. We learn to live with ghosts. The Iraq War continued its brutal course, with insurgent violence reaching new peaks during 2005. The Second Battle of Fallujah had destroyed much of the city, potentially burying forever any physical evidence of what had happened to the Red Cross convoy. Humanitarian organizations that had hoped to return to Iraq once security improved instead found themselves planning indefinite withdrawal as conditions deteriorated further. Intelligence reports began classifying the convoy's disappearance as a probable fatality case, though families were not officially informed of this assessment. The practical implication was that active search resources would be redirected to more recent cases where rescue might still be possible. After 2 years of intensive investigation, Isabella Conti and her colleagues had joined the ranks of Iraq's disappeared, remembered by their families, but forgotten by the machinery of war. The third anniversary of the convoy's disappearance marked a turning point for all 6 families. The milestone forced them to confront the statistical reality that intelligence agencies had quietly accepted months earlier. Their loved ones were almost certainly dead, yet without bodies or definitive evidence, the families found themselves trapped in what psychologists term ambiguous loss, grieving people who might still be alive while hoping for people who were probably dead. Elena Conti made a decision that shocked her husband and extended family. In March 2006, she organized a memorial service for Isabella at their local church, complete with eulogies, photographs, and all the traditional elements of a funeral, except a body to bury. "I need to say goodbye to my daughter as she was," she explained to skeptical relatives. "If she comes home tomorrow, I will joyfully say hello again. But I cannot live forever in the space between hello and goodbye." The service drew international attention, with representatives from humanitarian organizations worldwide attending to honor not just Isabella, but all aid workers who had disappeared in conflict zones. The Red Cross officially participated, recognizing the memorial as an important step in acknowledging losses that couldn't be formally confirmed. Eleanor's decision inspired other families of missing persons to hold similar ceremonies, creating a new ritual for processing unresolved grief. Marco Conti did not attend his daughter's memorial service. He had retreated so deeply into denial that he couldn't accept even symbolic acknowledgement of Isabella's likely death. His mental state deteriorated to the point where neighbors quietly began caring for his vineyard, while he spent days sitting in Isabella's childhood bedroom, reading her old medical school textbooks as if preparing for her return. The marriage that had survived 30 years of ordinary challenges couldn't withstand the extraordinary pressure of ambiguous loss. In London, the Thompson family took a different approach. Rather than holding memorial services, they established the Sarah Thompson Foundation for aid worker safety, lobbying for improved security protocols and insurance coverage for humanitarian missions. David Thompson had channeled his grief into policy advocacy, becoming one of Europe's most knowledgeable voices on protecting civilian aid workers in conflict zones. His expertise was born from tragedy, but his recommendations would eventually save other families from experiencing similar losses. The investigation itself had transformed into an academic exercise. Intelligence analysts continued reviewing satellite imagery, interviewing refugees, and analyzing insurgent communications, but their efforts were now focused on understanding patterns of violence against aid workers rather than finding specific individuals. The Red Cross convoy had become case study number 47 in a classified database of attacks on humanitarian missions, valuable for preventing future incidents, but offering no comfort to grieving families. Klaus Weber's fiancée Anna had made a life-altering decision. In 2006, she married a Jordanian aid worker she had met while investigating Klaus's disappearance. Their wedding was both a celebration and an acknowledgement that Klaus would not return to claim his place at the altar. Anna's decision sparked controversy within Klaus's family, some viewing it as betrayal, while others saw it as a healthy step toward resuming life after loss. Anna herself described the marriage as loving two men separated by death and circumstances beyond my control. The most heartbreaking developments involved the children. Marie Dubois' son Jean, now 8, had developed elaborate fantasy scenarios about his mother's eventual return. He would set places for her at dinner, save portion of his allowance to buy her gifts, and refuse to let his grandparents change anything in what he still called Maman's room. Child psychologists recognized these behaviors as normal responses to ambiguous loss, but worried about Jean's inability to develop age-appropriate coping mechanisms. Sophie Dubois, now 11, had taken the opposite approach. She angrily rejected any mention of her mother, claiming she was tired of waiting for someone who doesn't want to come home. Her response worried counselors more than Jean's fantasy life, as it indicated premature psychological closure without proper grieving process. The children were processing the same loss in completely different ways, requiring individualized therapeutic approaches. Karim Hassan's disappearance had created rifts within Detroit's Lebanese-American community. Some families had lost relatives during Lebanon's civil war and understood the specific agony of not knowing a loved one's fate. Others, primarily recent immigrants, couldn't understand why the Hassan family didn't simply accept Karim's death and move forward. Fatima Hassan found herself mediating between different cultural approaches to processing loss while managing her own unresolved grief. The broader humanitarian community began implementing policy changes inspired partly by the Red Cross Convoy's disappearance. New protocols required more sophisticated communication systems, regular check-ins, and clearer evacuation procedures for aid workers in high-risk areas. Insurance policies were restructured to provide better support for families of missing workers. These changes represented positive developments born from tragedy, but they couldn't resurrect 6 people who had already paid the ultimate price for their commitment to helping others. Intelligence agencies had privately concluded that the convoy members were dead, but families were not officially notified of this assessment. The distinction between missing and presumed dead had legal implications for insurance claims, death certificates, and inheritance issues. Families found themselves navigating bureaucratic complexities that seemed designed to punish rather than support people already suffering from unimaginable loss. As 2006 ended, each family had found different ways of living with uncertainty. Some had moved toward acceptance and symbolic closure. Others had retreated into denial, and many existed somewhere between hope and despair. Isabella Conti and her 5 colleagues had become more than missing persons. They had become symbols of humanitarian sacrifice and the brutal costs of trying to help others in a world torn apart by war. By 2007, the families had learned to navigate a world that had largely forgotten their missing loved ones. The Iraq War continued its devastating course, but international attention had shifted to new crises, new scandals, and new tragedies. The disappearance of 6 aid workers, once front-page news, had been relegated to the footnotes of a conflict that had already claimed hundreds of thousands of lives. If this case has already gripped you, leave a like. It helps the story of Isabella Conti and her colleagues reach more people. The bureaucratic machinery designed to support families of missing persons proved inadequate for cases involving extended uncertainty. Legal systems in multiple countries struggled with questions that had no precedent. When could missing persons be declared legally dead? How should inheritance laws apply when death couldn't be confirmed? What obligations did governments have to continue searching for citizens who had disappeared in foreign conflicts? Elena Conti had become an expert in international law regarding missing persons, not by choice, but by necessity. She discovered that different countries had vastly different approaches to handling such cases. Some nations declared individuals legally dead after 7 years of absence, while others required definitive proof of death regardless of circumstances. The Red Cross Convoy members having disappeared while working for an international organization, fell into jurisdictional gaps that complicated even basic administrative matters. The Italian government faced particular pressure because Isabella Conti had become a national symbol of humanitarian service. Her photograph appeared in government buildings and medical schools, inspiring a generation of young doctors to consider aid work. However, this symbolic elevation couldn't address the practical needs of her parents, who were struggling with financial difficulties as Marco's mental health prevented him from maintaining their farm effectively. British authorities had classified Sarah Thompson's case as missing, presumed dead for administrative purposes, while maintaining publicly that the search remained active. This dual approach allowed the government to avoid difficult questions about resource allocation while providing some bureaucratic closure for family-related matters. The Thompson parents understood this diplomatic language, but found it emotionally unsatisfying. Intelligence reports from this period, later declassified, revealed the extent of what agencies actually knew about the convoy's fate. Intercepted communications from 2003 to 2004 had included references to attacks on foreign medical workers along the Baghdad-Fallujah route, but the intercepts were too fragmented and contextualized within broader insurgent communications to provide definitive information about specific incidents. Klaus Weber's case presented unique challenges for German authorities. As a civilian contractor rather than a formal aid worker, his legal status was ambiguous. His fiancée Anna's marriage to a Jordanian citizen further complicated matters, as German laws regarding inheritance and survivor benefits hadn't anticipated such scenarios. Legal experts spent months determining what financial support, if any, was available to families in Klaus's situation. The most disturbing discovery during this period involved systematic failures in record-keeping by multiple agencies. Coalition forces, Iraqi authorities, international organizations, and individual governments had all maintained separate databases of missing persons, often with conflicting or incomplete information. The Red Cross Convoy appeared in some databases but not others, with different agencies listing different details about the incident. Marie Dubois' children were now approaching adolescence with no resolution to their mother's disappearance. 12-year-old Sophie had developed what psychologists termed anticipatory independence, behaving as if she were already an adult to protect herself from further disappointment. 9-year-old Jean had moved in the opposite direction, becoming increasingly dependent on his grandparents and resistant to age-appropriate responsibilities. The Dubois family's financial situation had become desperate. Marie's salary from the Red Cross had ended when she was declared missing, but French bureaucracy prevented her from being declared dead without definitive proof. Her husband's psychological breakdown meant he couldn't work consistently, and the children's grandparents were spending their retirement savings on legal fees and therapy costs. The family existed in financial limbo, much like their emotional state. Karim Hassan's disappearance had created unexpected connections within Detroit's Arab-American community. Families who had lost relatives in Lebanon, Syria, and Palestine during various conflicts recognized the specific trauma of not knowing a loved one's fate. Fatima Hassan's support group had grown to include dozens of families dealing with similar losses, creating an informal network of mutual aid and understanding. Intelligence agencies began sharing information more systematically during this period, leading to new insights about insurgent operations along the Baghdad-Fallujah route. Analysis revealed that attacks on aid workers had followed consistent patterns, with insurgent groups specifically targeting international vehicles during certain time periods. This information was valuable for protecting future aid missions, but provided no comfort to families still seeking answers about past incidents. The physical landscape where the convoy had disappeared continued changing as Iraq's civil war intensified. Entire neighborhoods were destroyed, mass graves were discovered and excavated, and the constant movement of military forces disturbed any potential crime scenes. Forensic experts privately acknowledged that even if they had perfect information about where to look, the chances of finding usable evidence after 4 years were minimal. Religious communities in all 6 countries had developed different approaches to supporting families dealing with ambiguous loss. Some emphasized hope and the possibility of miraculous return, while others focused on acceptance and moving forward with life. The theological challenges were significant, How should religious traditions address disappearance when they were primarily designed to cope with confirmed death? As 2007 ended, the families had settled into new forms of normalcy that incorporated uncertainty as a permanent feature of their lives. Some had found ways to honor their missing loved ones while building new relationships and pursuing new goals. Others remained frozen in time, unable to move forward without resolution. All had learned that closure might be a luxury they would never experience. The Red Cross convoy had joined the ranks of history's disappeared, people whose fates would remain forever unknown, remembered primarily by those who loved them while the world moved on to other concerns. 8 years after the convoy's disappearance, the families had developed complex relationships with hope itself. They had learned to function while carrying the permanent weight of unresolved loss, but unexpected developments could still shatter the careful equilibrium they had built around uncertainty. In early 2011, the capture of several high-ranking insurgent leaders led to new interrogations that occasionally produced references to attacks on foreign aid workers. Intelligence agencies would contact the families whenever such information emerged, but these briefings had become exercises in managing expectations rather than providing genuine hope. The families had learned to brace themselves for disappointment while remaining available for the possibility that this time might be different. Elena Conti had remarried, a development that shocked many who knew her story. Her new husband, Dr. Alessandro Ricci, was a widowed physician who had lost his wife to cancer and understood the complexity of loving someone while honoring the memory of another. Their relationship represented not a betrayal of Isabella's memory, but a recognition that life must continue even in the absence of closure. Marco Conti had never recovered from his daughter's disappearance. He spent his final years in a care facility, his mind having retreated to a time when Isabella was still a child playing in their vineyard. He died in 2010 without ever accepting that she was gone, and Elena's decision to include Isabella's name on his tombstone, beloved father of Isabella wherever she may be, sparked controversy within their extended family. The Thompson family had channeled their grief into legislative achievement. The Sarah Thompson Protection Act, passed by the British Parliament in 2009, established new requirements for ensuring aid workers and supporting families of missing personnel. David Thompson's testimony during parliamentary hearings was widely regarded as one of the most powerful presentations ever given by a civilian to a legislative body. Margaret Thompson had developed a different form of activism, working with refugee organizations to interview families who had fled Iraq during the worst periods of violence. Her fluency in Arabic, acquired during years of investigating Sarah's disappearance, made her uniquely qualified to document testimonies from Iraqi civilians who might have witnessed attacks on aid workers. Her work contributed to historical records of the conflict, while maintaining the slim possibility of discovering information about the Red Cross convoy. Klaus Weber's story took an unexpected turn in 2011 when his fiancée Anna, now remarried and living in Jordan, received a package with no return address. Inside was Klaus's medical school ring, which he had worn during the convoy mission. The ring was accompanied by a note in Arabic stating simply, "He helped our children. We remember." Forensic analysis of the package revealed nothing about its origin, but Anna chose to interpret it as confirmation that Klaus had died while serving others. The ring's discovery prompted renewed investigation efforts, but they yielded no additional information. The gesture seemed designed more to provide emotional closure than practical information. Anna arranged for the ring to be buried in a Munich cemetery, finally giving Klaus's family a place to mourn. The ceremony was attended by hundreds of aid workers who had been inspired by Klaus's sacrifice. Marie Dubois' children had reached adolescence with vastly different relationships to their mother's memory. Sophie, now 16, had embraced her mother's legacy by volunteering with refugee organizations and planning to study international relations. Jean, 13, had rejected anything connected to humanitarian work and expressed anger whenever anyone mentioned his mother's sacrifice. Their different responses reflected the various ways people process ambiguous loss, with neither approach being inherently healthier than the other. The French government had finally agreed to declare Marie legally dead for administrative purposes, while maintaining that the search for information about her fate remained active. This compromise allowed her children to receive survivor benefits and inherit her assets, providing some financial stability while acknowledging that bureaucratic closure differed from emotional resolution. Karim Hassan's mother, Fatima, had become a respected elder in Detroit's Lebanese-American community, her dignity in facing uncertainty inspiring others dealing with their own losses. She established an annual memorial service for all community members who had disappeared during various Middle Eastern conflicts, creating a space for collective grieving that honored uncertain losses alongside confirmed deaths. The memorial service, held each March on the anniversary of the Convoy's disappearance, drew participants from multiple ethnic and religious communities. Fatima's ability to speak about loss in universal terms, while honoring specific cultural traditions, made her an influential figure in Detroit's interfaith community. Her son's disappearance had transformed her from a private person into a public advocate for families dealing with similar losses. Intelligence agencies had developed more sophisticated analytical tools during this period, using computer modeling to analyze patterns of insurgent attacks and predict likely locations for undiscovered mass graves. The Red Cross Convoy case was included in these analyses, but the mathematical models confirmed what investigators had long suspected. Too much time had passed, and too much landscape had been disturbed for physical evidence to remain discoverable. The humanitarian community had implemented comprehensive reforms inspired partly by the convoy's disappearance. New communication protocols, improved security training, and enhanced insurance coverage had become standard for aid workers operating in conflict zones. These changes represented positive developments born from tragedy, but they served as constant reminders of the price paid by Isabella Conti and her colleagues. Iraq itself was undergoing political transition as American forces prepared to withdraw, but the country remained dangerous for international aid workers. The Red Cross had never resumed full operations in Iraq, and other organizations maintained only minimal presence. The dream of rebuilding Iraq's healthcare system, the mission that had motivated Isabella's final journey, remained largely unrealized 8 years after her disappearance. As 2011 ended, the families had learned to live with permanent uncertainty while finding ways to honor their missing loved ones through actions rather than answers. They had discovered that closure might be impossible, but meaning could still be found in how they chose to remember and continue the work their loved ones had begun. 13 years had passed since Isabella Conti's voice last crackled over the radio from Iraq's most dangerous road. By 2016, the families had established new rhythms of life that incorporated their losses, while acknowledging that final answers might never come. The passage of time had transformed acute grief into something more complex, a permanent awareness of absence that shaped but no longer paralyzed their daily existence. The Iraq War had officially ended, but the country remained unstable as new conflicts emerged. The Islamic State's rise had brought fresh waves of violence to regions where the Red Cross convoy had disappeared, making any renewed search efforts impossible. Archaeological teams attempting to excavate mass graves from the earlier conflict found their work repeatedly interrupted by ongoing security concerns. Elena Conti, now in her 70s, had become an internationally recognized advocate for families of the disappeared. Her work with United Nations committees had contributed to new international protocols for handling cases involving missing persons in conflict zones. She traveled frequently to speak at conferences, finding purpose in helping other families navigate systems that remained inadequate for addressing ambiguous loss. The Italian government had established the Isabella Conti Memorial Fund, providing scholarships for medical students interested in humanitarian work. Each year, 12 young doctors received funding to pursue advanced training in emergency medicine and conflict zone healthcare. The program ensured that Isabella's commitment to healing others would continue inspiring new generations, even though her own fate remained unknown. David Thompson had retired from teaching to focus entirely on aid worker protection advocacy. His expertise, born from personal tragedy, had influenced policy decisions across multiple international organizations. The Thompson Institute for Humanitarian Security, established at Oxford University, had become a leading research center for protecting civilian aid workers in conflict zones. Margaret Thompson continued her work interviewing Iraqi refugees, now focusing on documenting the broader history of violence against civilians during the conflict. Her Arabic language skills and sensitive interviewing techniques had made her valuable to historians, attempting to understand the war's impact on ordinary Iraqis. She had never found information about Sarah's specific fate, but her work honored her daughter's memory by giving voice to other victims of the conflict. Klaus Weber's story had taken on legendary status within Germany's medical community. His former medical school established an annual award recognizing students who demonstrated exceptional commitment to serving others in dangerous circumstances. The Klaus Weber Award recipients often went on to distinguished careers in humanitarian medicine, extending his legacy far beyond his abbreviated life. Anna Weber, she had kept Klaus's name after her remarriage, had established a small NGO providing medical supplies to Palestinian refugee camps. Her work was partly motivated by her belief that Klaus would have continued serving others if he had survived. The organization's modest size allowed for personal attention to individual families, reflecting Klaus's own approach to patient care. Marie Dubois' children had reached young adulthood with vastly different relationships to their mother's legacy. Sophie had graduated from university, with degrees in international law and Arabic studies, preparing for a career in humanitarian work, despite her grandparents' concerns about following her into dangerous territory. She spoke publicly about how her mother's disappearance had inspired rather than deterred her commitment to helping others. Jean Dubois had chosen a completely different path, studying engineering and expressing no interest in international affairs or humanitarian work. His response to loss had been to seek certainty and control in technical fields where problems had definitive solutions. Neither sibling's approach was superior. They simply represented different ways of processing the same traumatic experience. Karim Hassan's legacy lived on through his mother's continued advocacy work in Detroit. Fatima Hassan, now in her 80s, remained active in supporting families of missing persons while serving as an informal counselor for recent immigrants dealing with uncertainty about relatives in war zones. Her support group had evolved into a formal non-profit organization serving the broader metropolitan area. The Lebanese-American community had established a memorial garden honoring Karim and other community members who had disappeared during various Middle Eastern conflicts. The garden provided a physical space for reflection and remembrance, while acknowledging that traditional graves were not always possible for families affected by war and displacement. Intelligence agencies had largely closed active investigation into the Red Cross Convoy case, though the files remained technically open. Periodic reviews of new information continued, but resources were allocated to more recent cases where intervention might still be possible. The convoy's disappearance had become a historical case study rather than an active investigation. Forensic technology had advanced significantly during the 13-year period, offering theoretical possibilities for analyzing degraded evidence that might not have been conclusive using earlier methods. However, the practical challenges of accessing potential sites in Iraq remained insurmountable due to ongoing security concerns and the passage of time. The Red Cross had never fully resumed operations in Iraq, maintaining only minimal emergency services through local partners. The organization's institutional memory of the convoy's disappearance influenced policy decisions about risk assessment and security protocols in other conflict zones. Isabella Conti and her colleagues had become part of the organization's history, remembered in training materials and policy documents. Religious communities in all 6 countries had developed commemorative practices for honoring the missing aid workers, while acknowledging the uncertainty surrounding their fates. These rituals provided spiritual comfort without requiring theological resolution of questions about life, death, and divine purpose that had no easy answers. As 2016 progressed, the families had learned to find meaning in ambiguity and purpose in continuing their loved ones' work rather than waiting for final answers. They had discovered that some losses could be honored without being resolved, and that love could persist in the absence of closure. The Red Cross Convoy had disappeared into Iraq's chaos, but the values its members represented continued living through those who remembered them. On a grey October morning in 2016, Eleanor Conti received a phone call that would finally provide the answers she had sought for 13 years and 8 months. The voice belonged to Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a British intelligence officer who had been tracking various leads related to missing aid workers in Iraq. "Mrs. Conti," she said carefully, "we need to meet. There are documents you should see." The meeting took place at the Italian Embassy in London, with representatives from 6 different governments present. The families of all convoy members had been invited, though not all could attend. Eleanor Conti was there, along with David and Margaret Thompson, Anna Weber and Fatima Hassan. Marie Dubois' children, now adults, had chosen to send a representative rather than face the emotional intensity personally. Dr. Mitchell began with an apology that carried the weight of 13 years. "We should have had this conversation much sooner," she admitted. "What I'm about to share with you has been known, in various forms, since 2004. The delay in sharing this information was not intended to cause additional suffering, but our protocols for handling classified information were inadequate for addressing your needs as families." The documents spread across the conference table told a story that was both devastating and strangely comforting. In April 2004, just over a year after the convoy's disappearance, coalition forces had captured a mid-level insurgent commander during a raid in Fallujah. During interrogation, he had provided detailed information about attacks on foreign aid workers, including specific references to the Italian doctor and her team. According to the captured insurgents' account, the Red Cross convoy had been attacked on March 18, 2003, approximately 20 kilometers outside Fallujah. The attack had been conducted by a local insurgent cell that had mistaken the medical vehicles for a military convoy, despite their clearly marked Red Cross symbols. The insurgent claimed that his group had realized their mistake only after the attack was complete, when they discovered medical supplies and identification documents indicating the victim's humanitarian status. The insurgent's confession included disturbing but specific details that intelligence analysts had verified through other sources. He described how the convoy members had been killed during the initial attack, with their bodies subsequently buried in a remote location to prevent discovery. The attack had not been planned as an anti-humanitarian operation, but rather as a case of fatal mistaken identity during a period of intense military activity in the region. Most painfully for the families, the documents revealed that Isabella Conti had survived the initial attack and had attempted to treat wounded insurgents despite being injured herself. The captured insurgent described her medical efforts with what the interrogation report characterized as obvious respect and remorse. She had died while trying to save others, including those who had attacked her convoy. Sarah Thompson had also survived the initial attack, but had been killed while attempting to radio for help. Her final transmission had been interrupted, which explained why coalition forces had received only fragmentary communications from the convoy. Klaus Weber had died protecting Marie Dubois and Karim Hassan, using his body to shield them during the attack. Both had succumbed to their injuries shortly afterward, despite Klaus's efforts. The reason families had never been informed of these details was bureaucratic rather than intentional cruelty. The captured insurgent had been classified as an unreliable source due to his changing stories about other incidents. Intelligence protocols required multiple confirmations before information could be shared with families, and those confirmations had never materialized. The insurgent himself had been killed during a prison riot in 2005, taking his detailed knowledge of the attack with him. Additional documents revealed the locations where the convoy members had allegedly been buried, but reconnaissance of those sites had been impossible due to ongoing combat operations. By the time security conditions might have allowed for excavation, the areas had been heavily damaged by subsequent fighting, making recovery efforts futile. Elena Conti sat quietly as Dr. Mitchell presented the final pieces of information. Forensic analysis of items recovered from various sites near Fallujah had revealed traces of medical equipment consistent with the convoy's supplies. DNA analysis had been inconclusive due to degradation, but the circumstantial evidence strongly supported the captured insurgents' account. "Why now?" Margaret Thompson asked, her voice steady despite the emotional weight of the revelations. "What changed that allowed you to share this information today?" The answer involved policy changes implemented by multiple governments in response to advocacy efforts by families like theirs. New protocols required intelligence agencies to share available information with families of missing persons, even when that information couldn't be definitively confirmed through traditional intelligence standards. The family's right to know had finally been recognized as superseding bureaucratic preferences for certainty. The meeting concluded with offers of support services and discussion of whether the families wished to pursue any form of commemorative action. The location information, while imprecise, might allow for symbolic memorials even if physical recovery remained impossible. The governments represented also discussed options for additional financial support and formal recognition of the convoy members' sacrifice. As the families processed this information in the days following the briefing, their reactions varied significantly. Eleanor Conti expressed relief at finally understanding her daughter's fate, describing the certainty as a cruel gift I had stopped expecting to receive. David Thompson focused on the confirmation that Sarah had died while trying to help others, finding meaning in the consistency between her final actions and her life's values. Anna Weber struggled with learning that Klaus had died protecting others, wondering whether different decisions might have saved them all. Fatima Hassan found comfort in knowing that Karim's death had been quick rather than the prolonged captivity she had sometimes imagined. The Dubois family's response was mixed, with Sophie grateful for closure, while Jean expressed anger about the 13-year delay in sharing available information. The revelation sparked broader discussions about government obligations to families of missing persons and the balance between security concerns and human compassion. Policy advocates, including several of the affected families, used the incident to push for faster information sharing in future cases involving disappeared persons. International media coverage of the delayed disclosure created pressure for similar revelations in other cases involving missing aid workers. The Red Cross convoy case became a catalyst for reviewing classified files related to humanitarian worker disappearances, leading to additional disclosures that provided closure for other families who had waited years for answers. Subscribe to our channel to explore more archived and disturbing cases. Thank you for following the story of Isabella Conti and her colleagues. We'll see you in the next video. The truth about the Red Cross convoy's fate brought no justice. The perpetrators were long dead, and the landscape that had witnessed their sacrifice had been transformed by 13 years of additional conflict. But for 6 families who had lived with uncertainty for over a decade, the truth provided something more valuable than justice: the ability to finally grieve properly, to honor their loved one's memory with complete knowledge of their sacrifice, and to understand that Isabella Conti and her colleagues had died as they had lived, trying to heal rather than harm, serving others even in their final moments. In the end, Isabella Conti's legacy lived not in the mystery of her disappearance, but in the confirmed truth of her character. She had spent her final moments on Earth practicing medicine, treating even those who had harmed her convoy. The desert had kept its secrets for 13 years, but the truth revealed a woman who had remained true to her Hippocratic oath until the very end, making her disappearance not just a tragedy, but a testament to the power of human compassion in the face of senseless violence.